The September sun hung high over Portland's Riverside Park, casting golden light across the sprawling community festival that had become a beloved annual tradition. Officer Marcus Riley stood near the main pavilion, his dark blue uniform crisp despite the warmth of the afternoon. Beside him sat Thor, his German Shepherd K9 partner, a magnificent specimen of canine athleticism and discipline. Thor's black and tan coat gleamed in the sunlight, his pointed ears rotating like radar dishes, constantly alert to every sound and movement around them. Marcus had been a K9 officer for 5 years, and in that time, Thor had become more than just a working partner. He was family. They'd shared countless hours of training, hundreds of calls, and moments of both intense danger and quiet companionship. At festivals like this, their role was simple: community engagement. Let families see that police officers were approachable, that K9 units weren't just for dramatic television shows, but real working teams dedicated to protecting and serving their neighborhoods. The festival was in full swing. The aroma of grilled burgers and sweet funnel cakes wafted through the air, mixing with the cheerful sounds of children's laughter and live band music from the main stage. Colorful tents lined the walking paths, offering everything from handmade jewelry to face painting. Families clustered around game booths where children tossed rings at bottles and threw darts at balloons, squealing with delight when they won oversized stuffed animals. Marcus noticed how children reacted to Thor. Most approached cautiously, their eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and fear. Parents held smaller children's hands tightly, asking permission before allowing their kids to get close. "Can my son pet your dog?" they'd ask politely. Marcus always knelt down to the child's level, explaining that Thor was very friendly but also very well trained, and they should let Thor sniff their hand first. He'd watched countless children light up with joy when Thor's tail wagged, or when he gave their hand a gentle lick. Thor was exceptional at these events. Despite his imposing size, nearly 85 pounds of solid muscle, he had an innate gentleness with people, especially children. His dark amber eyes seemed to understand human emotion in ways that constantly amazed Marcus. During their working calls, Thor could switch instantly into tracking mode, his nose working overtime to follow scents across miles of terrain. But here, at the festival, he was patient and calm, allowing himself to be photographed and petted by dozens of admirers. Marcus took a long sip from his water bottle, scanning the crowd with the observational habits that came naturally after years in law enforcement. He recognized several familiar faces: shop owners from downtown, teachers from the local elementary school, families he'd encountered during various community events. Portland's Riverside neighborhood had a strong sense of community, and events like this reinforced those bonds. Near the food truck area, about 30 yards away, Marcus noticed a young woman juggling a purse, a diaper bag, and what appeared to be tickets for the raffle booth. She had shoulder-length auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and wore a simple sundress. Beside her, holding her hand, was a boy who looked about 7 years old, and in front of them toddled a small girl with an explosion of curly brown hair that caught the sunlight like a halo. The little girl couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She wore a bright pink t-shirt with a cartoon character on it and tiny denim shorts. Her chubby legs carried her with that distinctive toddler waddle, wide-based, slightly unsteady, but determined. Marcus smiled. There was something universally endearing about toddlers at that age, so confident in their ability to navigate the world despite their small size. Then something changed. The little girl's attention suddenly locked onto something across the pathway. Marcus followed her gaze and realized with a start that she was staring directly at Thor. Most children stared at the impressive police dog, but this was different. The toddler's entire body language shifted. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and even from this distance, Marcus could see recognition flash across her small face. Before her mother could react, the little girl dropped her mother's hand and took off. Not the casual wandering of a curious toddler, but a purposeful march. Her curly hair bounced with each determined step as she headed straight toward Thor, her small arms pumping at her sides. She dodged around a teenager texting on his phone, squeezed between two elderly women chatting near a bench, and kept coming. Marcus straightened up, his body tensing instinctively. Thor's ears perked forward and his tail stopped its lazy wag. The dog had noticed the approaching child. Around them, other festival-goers began to notice too. Conversations paused mid-sentence. A man lowering his camera lens instead raised it again, sensing something unusual was about to happen. "Emma, no, Emma, stop." The woman's voice cut through the ambient festival noise, sharp with maternal panic. She lurched forward, the raffle tickets scattering from her hand as she tried to catch her daughter. The older boy beside her looked confused, then concerned as he watched his little sister's unexpected sprint. But the toddler Emma didn't stop, didn't even slow down. She was fixated entirely on Thor, her small face set with a determination that seemed far beyond her years. Marcus's mind raced through protocols. Thor was impeccably trained and had never shown aggression toward anyone, especially children. But this was unusual. The directness of the approach, the speed, the unexpected nature of it. "Wait," Marcus said, raising his hand toward the approaching mother, his voice calm but authoritative. Years of training had taught him to assess situations quickly, and something about this moment felt different. Not dangerous, but significant. Thor remained seated in perfect position, but Marcus could feel the subtle shift in his partner's attention. The dog wasn't alarmed. His body language showed curiosity, not threat. His tail had begun a slow, tentative wag. The crowd that had been milling about now formed a loose circle, all eyes on the small girl closing the final few feet between herself and the large police dog. Smartphones that had been checking social media or capturing festival moments now turned toward the unfolding scene. But there was something in the air that made people hesitate to interrupt, an unspoken sense that they were witnessing something unexpected and potentially meaningful. Emma stopped just inches from Thor's face, so close that her wild curls nearly brushed against his black nose. The German shepherd's nostrils flared slightly, taking in her scent. His ears remained forward, alert but not aggressive. Marcus held his breath, his hand hovering near Thor's shoulder, ready to intervene if necessary but trusting his partner's judgment. The festival noise seemed to fade into the background. The band's music, the children's laughter, the sizzle of food on grills, all became a distant hum. In this moment, there was only a tiny girl and a police dog, facing each other in silent communication that transcended words. Emma's small chest rose and fell with excited breaths. Her eyes, bright and clear, locked onto Thor's amber gaze with an intensity that sent chills down Marcus's spine. The mother reached them, breathing hard, her hand extended to pull her daughter back. "I'm so sorry, officer," but her words died in her throat as Emma opened her mouth to speak, and the words that came out would change everything. Sarah Mitchell's heart hammered against her ribcage as she watched her 3-year-old daughter standing face to face with the massive German shepherd. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to snatch Emma away, to put her body between her baby and the police dog, but something in Officer Riley's raised hand made her pause. His palm was open, steady, his expression calm but intensely focused. Sarah's breath came in short gasps, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios even as her feet remained frozen in place. "It's okay," Marcus said softly, his voice barely above a murmur, as if speaking to both Sarah and to Thor simultaneously. "Just give them a moment." Around them, the crowd had grown. What had started as a few curious onlookers had swelled to at least 30 people, forming a loose semicircle around the unusual tableau. An elderly man with a veteran's cap tilted his head, watching intently. A teenage girl clutched her friend's arm, her phone raised but forgotten in her hand. Two mothers with strollers had stopped mid-conversation, their eyes wide. Even the balloon vendor who'd been working the crowd had paused, his colorful wares bobbing above him in the breeze. Danny, Sarah's 7-year-old son, squeezed through the gathering crowd to stand beside his mother. "Mom, what's Emma doing?" he whispered, tugging on her sundress. His voice carried a note of concern but also curiosity. Danny had always been protective of his little sister, sometimes annoyingly so, but right now Sarah could feel him tense beside her, ready to jump in if needed. "I don't know, sweetie," Sarah whispered back, her voice trembling. She reached down and gripped Danny's shoulder as much to steady herself as to comfort him. Her mind was spinning. Emma had never shown fear of animals, quite the opposite actually. She toddled toward neighborhood cats and dogs with reckless abandon, much to Sarah's constant anxiety. But this was different. This wasn't just curiosity or the fearlessness of a toddler who didn't understand danger. Emma had looked at this police dog with something that looked startlingly like recognition. Thor remained perfectly still, his training evident in every line of his muscular body. His tail had begun a slow, measured wag, not the frantic excitement of a pet greeting its owner, but something more controlled, more intentional. His dark nose twitched as he breathed in Emma's scent, processing information in ways Sarah couldn't begin to understand. The dog's amber eyes stayed locked on the little girl's face, and if Sarah didn't know better, she would have sworn there was intelligence there, awareness, maybe even memory. Marcus kept his hand near Thor's shoulder, not touching but ready. He'd been a K-9 officer long enough to trust his partner implicitly, but he'd also learned that situations could change in an instant. Children were unpredictable. Even the gentlest dog could react poorly to a sudden movement, a grab at its ears, an accidental poke to sensitive areas. Yet something about this moment felt different. Thor's body language was relaxed despite his alertness. His mouth was closed but not tense. His breathing was even and calm. "That's a police dog, honey," Sarah finally managed to say, her voice cracking slightly. "You need to be careful. Come back to mommy." She extended her hand toward Emma, but her daughter didn't even glance in her direction. The toddler's entire world had narrowed to the German shepherd before her. Emma's small hands, which had been hanging at her sides, slowly rose. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Those tiny fingers, still dimpled with baby fat, reached forward with heartbreaking trust. Marcus tensed, ready to intervene, but Thor did something unexpected. The massive dog lowered his head slightly, bringing his face closer to Emma's level, as if inviting her touch. "Oh my God," someone in the crowd whispered. Emma's fingers made contact with Thor's fur, just above his nose, right between his eyes. She stroked downward with the gentle pressure only a toddler could manage, not quite petting, more like exploring. Thor's eyes half closed, a gesture of contentment that Marcus recognized immediately. His partner was accepting this child's touch, welcoming it even. A cell phone camera clicked, then another, but the sounds were muted, respectful, as if everyone present understood they were witnessing something special. A food truck vendor had stepped out from behind his counter, wiping his hands on his apron, watching with the same rapt attention as everyone else. The live band on the main stage had finished their song, and in the brief silence before the next one began, the festival seemed to hold its collective breath. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she couldn't have explained exactly why. Relief that Emma wasn't in danger, certainly. But it was more than that. There was something profound in watching her fearless daughter connect with this trained police dog, something that bypassed logic and spoke to deeper instincts about trust and recognition. Danny tugged on her arm again. "Mom," he said, his voice taking on a strange quality that Sarah couldn't quite identify. "Mom, that dog looks familiar." Sarah glanced down at her son, then back at Emma and the German shepherd. Familiar. How could a police dog look familiar to her 7-year-old? They'd never had a pet, never spent much time around. And then it hit her like a physical blow. The breath left her lungs in a rush. Her hand flew to her mouth, pressing hard against her lips as if to hold back the sound threatening to escape. No, it couldn't be, could it? "Officer," she managed to choke out, her voice barely audible. "Officer, what's your dog's name?" Marcus glanced up at her, noting the sudden pallor of her face, the way her entire body had gone rigid. "This is Thor," he said, his brow furrowing with concern. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need to sit down?" Thor, the name echoed in Sarah's mind, unlocking a flood of memories she tried so hard to suppress. 2 years ago, Forest Park, the worst day of her entire life. 6 hours of pure terror that had aged her a decade. The frantic search. The police officers and volunteers spreading through the dense woods. And the K-9 unit, a German shepherd named Thor, who had refused to give up. "Oh God," Sarah breathed, her knees felt weak. "Oh my God, it's him." The crowd sensed the shift in energy. The whispers stopped. Everyone leaned in slightly, unconsciously, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Marcus straightened up, his law enforcement instincts telling him that this moment was about to transform into something much bigger than a toddler petting a police dog. Emma, oblivious to the adult drama swirling around her, continued stroking Thor's face. Her little fingers traced the line of his jaw, touched the soft fur of his ears. And then, with the clear, pure voice that only a 3-year-old could produce, untainted by doubt or self-consciousness, Emma spoke. The words that came from her small mouth would stop everyone cold. They would bring grown men to tears and cause a hardened police officer to question everything he thought he knew about memory, connection, and the bonds that transcend time. They would set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through their community and beyond, reminding people why the relationship between humans and working dogs was so profoundly important. Emma looked directly into Thor's amber eyes, smiled with the innocent joy of a child recognizing an old friend, and said something that made the entire world stop turning. "You're the doggy who saved Danny." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the breeze seemed to pause, as if nature itself needed to absorb the weight of those 7 simple words. Sarah's hand dropped from her mouth, tears now streaming freely down her face. Marcus felt his heart stop, then restart with a thundering intensity that made his ears ring. Because Emma Mitchell had been only 13 months old that terrible day in Forest Park. Far too young, according to every child development expert, to form lasting explicit memories. Yet somehow, impossibly, she had recognized Thor, and she remembered. The words hung in the air like a crystal suspended in time, fragile and precious and utterly transformative. "You're the doggy who saved Danny." 7 words from a 3-year-old that shattered every assumption about memory, recognition, and the indelible marks that trauma and salvation leave on the human soul. Sarah's legs gave out. She didn't faint, didn't collapse dramatically, but her knees simply stopped supporting her weight, and she sank to the ground beside her daughter, one hand reaching out to steady herself on the grass. The tears that had been threatening now flowed freely, hot tracks down her cheeks that she made no effort to wipe away. Her whole body shook with the force of suppressed sobs, 2 years of tightly controlled emotion suddenly breaking free like a dam giving way. "Emma," she whispered, her voice breaking on her daughter's name. "Emma, baby, how do you—" But she couldn't finish the sentence. How could Emma remember? How was this possible? Officer Marcus Riley felt as though someone had punched him in the chest. The air left his lungs in a rush, and for a moment he couldn't draw another breath. His mind raced backward through 2 years of calls, hundreds of incidents, countless hours on patrol. But this one he remembered with crystal clarity. The Mitchell case, Forest Park, a missing 5-year-old boy named Danny. His eyes snapped to the 7-year-old standing beside Sarah, and recognition crashed over him like a wave. The boy had grown, his face had thinned. He'd lost that baby softness that 5-year-olds carry. But Marcus knew those eyes. He'd seen them red-rimmed with tears, wide with fear and hypothermia-induced confusion, staring up at him from the bottom of a ravine as Thor barked frantically above. "Danny Mitchell," Marcus breathed, his voice barely audible. "You're Danny Mitchell." The boy nodded slowly, his own eyes beginning to well with tears he didn't fully understand. At 7 years old, his memories of that day were fragmentary. Cold, fear, his mother's screaming voice getting farther away, the sound of a dog barking, strong arms lifting him up. He'd had nightmares for months afterward, but they'd faded with time, the way childhood trauma sometimes does when parents work hard to help their children heal. But now, standing in this sun-drenched park with a police dog and his little sister, something was clicking into place in Danny's mind. This dog, this specific German shepherd with the black and tan coat and intelligent amber eyes, he knew this dog. Thor, for his part, seemed to understand that something profound was happening. His tail had begun wagging with more enthusiasm now, that controlled discipline giving way to genuine canine joy. He shifted his weight, then did something that made Marcus's throat tighten with emotion. Thor gently pressed his large head against Emma's small chest, a gesture of affection and recognition that the dog reserved for people he truly trusted. The crowd had swelled to perhaps 50 people now, but no one spoke. Even the children present seemed to sense that adult things were happening, important things that required silence and attention. A woman in a floral dress had both hands pressed to her chest, tears streaming down her own face, though she had no connection to the unfolding drama beyond her shared humanity. An elderly man in a wheelchair had rolled closer, his weathered face creased with emotion. Marcus knelt down beside Sarah, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. Protocol and professional distance dissolved in the face of this moment. October 15th, 2023, he said quietly, his voice thick. Forest Park, 6-hour search. Sarah nodded, unable to speak, and simply pointed at Emma. The gesture said everything. She was there. She was just a baby, but she was there. She was so young, Marcus said, shaking his head in wonder. I remember now. You had her in a carrier on your husband's chest. I remember thinking how terrible it must have been to search for one child while caring for an infant. He paused, his professional training warring with the emotion of the moment. 13 months old. That's how old she was. No child that young should be able to remember. But Emma did remember. Perhaps not in the way adults remember, with clear narrative and temporal ordering. Perhaps it was something deeper, more primal, a sense memory, an emotional imprint, a recognition that bypassed the usual neural pathways of explicit recall. Scientists might debate the mechanisms, but the evidence was undeniable. This little girl, barely 3 years old now, had recognized the German shepherd who had saved her brother's life when she was too young to even walk steadily. Tell me, Sarah managed to say, her voice raw. Please tell me you remember. Tell me you remember finding him. Marcus sat back on his heels, his hand resting on Thor's back, drawing strength from his partner as he often did. The memories came flooding back with painful clarity. It was getting dark, he began, his voice distant as he traveled back in time. We'd been searching for almost 6 hours. Your husband was frantic. I remember he kept showing everyone Danny's picture on his phone, asking if anyone had seen him. You were trying to hold it together for the baby, but I could see you were breaking apart inside. Sarah nodded, fresh tears falling. That day had been the absolute worst of her life, a living nightmare that she'd tried so hard to move past. Thor picked up the scent near the main trail, Marcus continued. But Danny had wandered far off the established paths. We went deep into the forest, areas where most hikers never go. It was getting cold, temperature dropping fast. I remember thinking, his voice caught. I remember thinking we might not find him in time. But Thor wouldn't stop. He pulled me through brambles, across streams, through sections of forest so dense I could barely see 5 feet ahead. Danny had moved closer now, standing just behind his mother, his hand on her shoulder. He was old enough to understand the gravity of what was being described, old enough to realize how close he'd come to not coming home that day. Then Thor started barking, Marcus said, his eyes growing distant with memory. Not his alert bark, but this frantic, desperate sound I'd never heard from him before. We were at the edge of a ravine, maybe 20 feet deep, steep sides. And down at the bottom, huddled against the rocks, was this little boy in a red jacket. My jacket, Danny whispered. My red Spider-Man jacket. Marcus looked up at the boy and nodded. You tried to climb down looking for something, maybe a ball, maybe just exploring, and you couldn't get back up. You'd been down there for hours, Danny. You were hypothermic, shaking, your lips were blue, but you were alive. The crowd pressed closer, completely absorbed in the story. Several people were openly crying now, caught up in the raw emotion of a parent's worst nightmare with a miraculous ending. Thor wouldn't leave the edge of that ravine, Marcus continued, his hand stroking the dog's fur. He barked and barked until the rescue team arrived with ropes and equipment. It took us 45 minutes to safely extract Danny, and the entire time, Thor stayed right there at the top, watching. When we finally got Danny up, he was so scared and cold, but the first thing he did, Marcus's voice broke completely. What? Sarah asked, though somehow she already knew. The first thing he did was reach for Thor. This terrified, hypothermic 5-year-old boy reached out and wrapped his arms around Thor's neck and just held on. He wouldn't let go. We had to carry him to the ambulance with Thor walking right beside the stretcher. Your son held onto my dog's collar the entire way out of that forest. Sarah was sobbing openly now, great heaving gasps that shook her entire frame. Danny had tears running down his young face, his memories of that day suddenly sharp and clear. Emma, not fully understanding the adult emotions swirling around her but sensing their importance, kept her small hand on Thor's head, her touch gentle and constant. I never forgot that call, Marcus said quietly. In 5 years as a K-9 officer, that's the one that stays with me, the one that reminds me why we do this work, why these dogs are so important. A woman in the crowd stepped forward hesitantly. She had kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said softly, but I think everyone here needs to hear this story. This is why we fund these programs. This is why these dogs matter. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. People were nodding, wiping their eyes, looking at Thor with new understanding and appreciation. Sarah remained on her knees in the grass, her body folded forward as waves of emotion crashed over her. 2 years of carefully maintained composure, 2 years of telling herself that she'd moved past that trauma, 2 years of putting on a brave face for her children, all of it crumbled in an instant. The sobs came from somewhere deep in her chest, a place she'd locked away and refused to visit because the memory was simply too painful to bear. Danny moved closer to his mother, his 7-year-old arms wrapping around her shoulders in a role reversal that made several onlookers press their hands to their mouths. The boy was trying to comfort his mother, to be strong for her, even as his own tears fell silently onto her sundress. His memories were flooding back now with startling clarity. The cold, the fear, the overwhelming sense of being lost and alone, and then the sound of barking that had seemed like a miracle. Emma, still standing close to Thor, looked between her crying mother and brother with wide, confused eyes. She was too young to fully comprehend the weight of the moment, but she could feel the emotion saturating the air around her. Her small hand continued to rest on Thor's head, finding comfort in the dog's warm, solid presence. Marcus felt his own throat constrict painfully. He'd been trained to maintain professional composure in all situations, to be the calm presence that others could rely on during crisis. But this wasn't a crisis. This was the aftermath of one, the beautiful, painful moment of recognition and remembrance that reminded him exactly why he'd chosen this career path. His hand trembled slightly as it rested on Thor's back. That day, Sarah finally managed to speak, her voice muffled and broken. That day I thought I'd lost him forever. She looked up at Marcus, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. Do you know what it's like to watch the sun setting, to watch the sky getting darker, and know that your baby is out there somewhere alone in the cold? Marcus shook his head slowly. I can't imagine, I'm not a parent. Every minute felt like an hour, Sarah continued, the words pouring out now as if she'd been waiting 2 years to say them. Emma was crying because she could feel my panic. My husband was running through the woods screaming Danny's name until his voice gave out. The other searchers kept telling us to stay positive, to have faith, but I could see it in their eyes. I could see them starting to think we might not find him, or that we might find him too late. The crowd had grown completely silent. Even the ambient festival noise seemed to have faded away, or perhaps everyone present was so focused on Sarah's words that they simply didn't register the sounds around them. A young mother holding a toddler of her own pulled her child closer, her face pale as she imagined being in Sarah's position. I kept thinking about all the things I'd said to him that morning, Sarah went on, her voice cracking. Stupid things, mom things. I'd told him to stop running in the house. I'd been annoyed when he spilled his juice at breakfast, and I kept thinking, what if those were the last words I ever said to my son? What if the last thing he remembers is me being irritated about spilled juice? Danny made a small sound, pressing his face harder against his mother's shoulder. Even at 7, he could understand the agony in her voice, the weight of maternal guilt and fear that she'd carried alone for so long. Marcus found his own voice, though it was thick with emotion. That ravine, he said quietly, directing his words to the crowd as much as to Sarah. It was in a section of Forest Park that most people never see. Dense undergrowth, steep terrain, no marked trails. Danny had wandered almost 3 miles from where you last saw him. In that terrain, with darkness falling, with the temperature dropping, he stopped, unable to say what they all knew. Without Thor, the outcome would have been very different. When I heard the barking, Sarah said, looking at Thor with an expression of pure reverence, when I heard this dog barking in the distance, something in my chest just knew. Call it mother's intuition, call it hope, call it prayer. I just knew. And when we got there and saw Danny down in that ravine, she broke down again, unable to continue. An older man in the crowd stepped forward slightly, his veteran's cap marking him as someone who'd seen his share of difficult situations. "Ma'am," he said gently, his voice carrying decades of hard-won wisdom, "there's no shame in falling apart now. You held it together when it mattered. You got through it. Your boy is safe." He gestured to Danny. "That's what counts." Sarah nodded, trying to compose herself, wiping futilely at her tears with the back of her hand. Someone, a woman with kind eyes standing nearby, pressed a packet of tissues into her hand. Sarah took them gratefully, pressing them against her face. "Danny was in bad shape when we brought him up," Marcus continued, his professional training helping him maintain some semblance of composure even as his voice wavered. He was shaking so hard he couldn't speak. His core temperature had dropped dangerously low. The paramedics were seriously concerned about hypothermia, but you know what I remember most clearly? He paused, looking down at Thor, whose tail continued its slow, steady wag. The dog seemed to remember too, in whatever way dogs carry their memories, through scent, through association, through the deep bond between a working dog and the people he saved. "I remember Thor refusing to leave his side," Marcus said. "Even when the paramedics were working on Danny, wrapping him in warming blankets, checking his vitals, Thor stayed right there. He pushed his way past everyone until he could rest his head on the stretcher beside Danny. And your son," he looked at Danny now, "you reached out with this tiny, shaking hand and grabbed onto Thor's collar. You wouldn't let go. You held on like he was your lifeline." Danny's eyes were distant, lost in memory. "I remember that," he said softly, his young voice clear in the hushed silence. "I remember his fur was warm, and he smelled like outside and dog and safe. I remember thinking that as long as I held on to him, I'd be okay." Fresh tears erupted from several people in the crowd. The simple, profound statement from a 7-year-old boy. He smelled like safe, captured something essential about the relationship between humans and working dogs that no amount of statistics or official reports could convey. Sarah reached out and pulled Danny into a tighter embrace, then extended her other arm to Emma, gathering both her children against her. "You were strapped to your father's chest," she said to Emma, her voice still shaky but gaining strength. "In a baby carrier. You were barely over a year old, still so tiny. We had you bundled up because it was getting cold. You were crying, and your father was trying to comfort you while also searching, and I remember thinking this was impossible." How could we find Danny while caring for you? How could we split ourselves between terror for one child and responsibility for another? Emma tilted her head, trying to understand. I was there, she asked in her small voice. You were there, baby, Sarah confirmed, smoothing her daughter's wild curls with a trembling hand. You were there the whole time, when we first realized Danny was missing, during the search, when the police arrived with their dogs, when Thor led everyone to the ravine, when we finally got Danny back and rushed him to the hospital. You were there for all of it. Marcus leaned forward, his expression one of genuine wonder. But you were so young, he said to Emma, though she couldn't possibly understand the significance of what he was saying. 13 months old. The research says that children that young don't form explicit memories. It's too early for the brain structures responsible for long-term memory to be fully developed. A woman in the crowd spoke up. She wore a lanyard that identified her as Dr. Patricia Chen, and several people near her whispered that she was a pediatrician at the local hospital. Actually, Dr. Chen said carefully, stepping forward slightly, there's emerging research about trauma and memory in very young children. Significant emotional events, particularly those involving fear, separation from caregivers, or survival situations, can leave what we call implicit memories. The child might not remember the event consciously, but the emotional response gets encoded anyway. But she recognized him, Sarah said, gesturing to Thor. She looked at him and she knew that's not just an emotional response. She identified him specifically. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. It's rare but not impossible. Dogs have distinctive visual markers, coloring, size, facial structure, and scent. Never underestimate how powerful scent memory can be, especially in young children. If Emma spent hours near Thor during that traumatic day, her brain might have encoded his appearance and scent in ways we don't fully understand yet. Marcus looked at Thor, then at Emma, then back at the dog. I've heard about this, he said slowly. Canine trainers talk about it sometimes. They say that people who have been saved by a search and rescue dog sometimes have almost supernatural recognition of that specific dog even years later, like the brain marks it somehow. Survival memory. Circle of onlookers had grown to nearly 100 people now, with more arriving every moment as word spread through the festival that something extraordinary was happening near the main pavilion. The live band on the main stage had stopped playing, the musicians themselves stepping down to see what had captured everyone's attention. Festival vendors left their booths unattended, drawn by the palpable emotion radiating from the gathering. A man in his mid-30s pushed through the crowd, his face flushed and panicked. Sarah, what happened? Someone said Emma. He stopped abruptly when he saw his wife on the ground, both children in her arms, tears streaming down her face. His hand went to his chest as if checking that his heart was still beating. Oh God, is everyone okay? Michael, Sarah said, looking up at her husband with eyes that held both pain and wonder. Michael, it's him, it's Thor, the dog who found Danny. Michael Mitchell froze, his eyes moving from his wife to the German shepherd sitting calmly beside Officer Riley. Recognition dawned slowly across his features, followed by a cascade of emotions, shock, disbelief, and then something that looked like profound relief, as if a weight he'd been carrying for 2 years had suddenly been acknowledged and could finally be shared. The K9, Michael breathed, moving closer. His legs seemed uncertain beneath him and he dropped to his knees beside his family. I remember you, he said to Marcus, his voice rough. You were the handler. You brought him through those woods like nothing could stop you. Marcus nodded, feeling the moment grow even heavier with significance. Your family made an impression on all of us that day, he said simply. Michael reached out tentatively toward Thor, his hand shaking. The dog, sensing the man's emotion, shifted forward and pressed his large head into Michael's palm. The contact seemed to break something open in Michael, and tears began streaming down his face. He made no sound, but his shoulders shook with the force of suppressed sobs. I've never thanked you, Michael said, his words barely audible. I never got to thank you properly. We were at the hospital with Danny for 2 days, and then when we got home, everything was chaos, and I kept meaning to find you, to bring you something, too." He stopped, overwhelmed. "You don't need to thank me," Marcus said, his own voice tight. "This is what we do. This is why Thor and I work together." "No," Michael said firmly, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "No, you don't understand. You gave me back my son. You gave Sarah back her child. You kept our family whole. That deserves thanks. That deserves more than thanks. That deserves—" He struggled for words adequate to the moment and found none. A woman near the edge of the crowd pulled out her phone, but not to film. She was typing rapidly, sending messages. Within seconds, several other phones buzzed with incoming texts. The woman's husband, standing beside her, immediately made a call. "John, are you still at the basketball courts? Get over to the main pavilion. Now, trust me, you need to see this." Another person in the crowd, a man wearing a Riverside Community Association t-shirt, stepped forward. "Officer Riley," he said, his voice carrying authority and emotion in equal measure. "I'm David Torres, Community Association President. I don't know if you remember, but I was one of the volunteers searching for Danny that day." Marcus studied the man's face and nodded slowly. "I remember. You stayed out until almost midnight, even after Danny was found. You helped us search for his backpack." "We never found it," David said with a sad smile, "but we found what mattered." He turned to address the crowd, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "Does everyone here understand what they're witnessing? This isn't just a coincidence. This isn't just a cute story about a kid and a dog. This is about what our community's K-9 units do every single day. This is about the difference between a child coming home safe and a family being destroyed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several people were already filming now, phones held high to capture the scene. But the atmosphere remained respectful, reverent almost, as if everyone present understood they were part of something larger than themselves. "Our K-9 program is chronically underfunded," David continued, his voice gaining passion. "Every year we fight for budget allocations. Every year there's talk about cutting the program, reducing the number of dogs, limiting training resources. And every year I've stood at city council meetings trying to explain why these programs matter. But nothing I've ever said has been as powerful as what we're all seeing right now." A woman pushed through the crowd, slightly out of breath. She wore a press badge clipped to her shirt that identified her as Jennifer Kim from KPDX News. Her 7-year-old daughter trailed behind her, cotton candy in hand. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Jennifer said, addressing Sarah and Marcus. "I'm a reporter, but I'm here today with my family, not working. But this," she gestured to the scene before them, "this is a story people need to hear." Sarah looked uncertain, instinctively protective of her children and their privacy. Michael put his arm around her shoulders, and they exchanged one of those wordless marital conversations that happen in glances and subtle expressions. "If it helps other K-9 programs," Sarah finally said, her voice steadier now, "if it helps people understand why these dogs matter, then yes, share our story." Jennifer nodded gratefully and immediately pulled out her phone, but she kept it lowered, respectful. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Emma, crouching down to the toddler's level. "Sweetie, what made you walk over to Thor?" Emma looked at the reporter with the solemn expression toddlers sometimes adopt when adults ask them serious questions. Her small hand remained on Thor's head, fingers tangled in his fur. "He's nice," she said simply. "He helped Danny when Danny was scared." The simplicity of the statement, delivered in a 3-year-old's clear voice, hit everyone present with unexpected force. Several people made small, choked sounds. A teenage boy standing with his parents wiped roughly at his eyes, clearly embarrassed by his emotional response but unable to control it. Danny, who had been quiet throughout much of the exchange, suddenly spoke up. His voice was stronger than before, more confident. "I want to say something," he announced to the crowd. All eyes turned to the 7-year-old. Sarah squeezed his shoulder encouragingly. Danny looked directly at Thor, then up at Marcus. "I've had nightmares," he said, his young voice carrying surprising strength. "Ever since that day. Sometimes I dream I'm still in that dark place, still cold, still scared. But in the good dreams, in the ones where I'm not scared anymore, there's always a dog, a big dog with a warm face, and I hold on to him and I know I'm safe." He paused, swallowing hard. "I never knew if that was real or if I made it up, but it was real. Thor is real." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. In 5 years of K-9 work, he'd received plenty of thanks, plenty of acknowledgement, even a few commendations and awards. But nothing had ever touched him quite like this 7-year-old boy's confession about his dreams. "Thor remembers you too," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can tell. Dogs don't forget people who matter to them." As if to confirm this, Thor shifted his position and moved closer to Danny. The boy dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, just as he had 2 years ago in the bottom of a ravine when hypothermia had been stealing his warmth and consciousness. Thor stood perfectly still, accepting the embrace, his tail wagging slowly and steadily. The crowd erupted into spontaneous applause. It started with one person clapping, then spread like wildfire until nearly everyone present was applauding, some wiping away tears, others openly crying. The sound was thunderous but somehow also tender, a collective expression of emotion that transcended words. An older woman with silver hair worked her way to the front of the crowd. She wore an elegant blazer despite the warm weather, and something about her bearing suggested authority. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cultured and clear. "I'm Margaret Ashford. My husband and I have a family foundation, and we've been looking for worthy causes to support. Officer Riley, what would it cost to ensure that the K-9 program never faces budget cuts again?" Marcus blinked in surprise, temporarily speechless. David Torres jumped in, pulling out his phone to access financial information. "The annual operating budget for our 3 K-9 units is approximately $180,000, he said quickly. "That covers food, veterinary care, training, equipment, and partial handler stipends, but we could expand to 5 units for around $300,000 annually." Margaret nodded, pulling out her own phone. "Consider it done. I'll have my foundation administrator contact you tomorrow. No police dog program should ever be at risk of cuts due to funding." The crowd's applause grew even louder. Several people shouted their own pledges, $500 here, $1,000 there. Someone yelled that their company would match donations up to $10,000. The spontaneous outpouring of financial support was overwhelming. Sarah stood up slowly, helping Emma to her feet while Michael lifted Danny. The family stood together, united, whole, facing the dog who had kept them that way. "How do we thank you?" Sarah asked Marcus, echoing her husband's earlier question but with different emphasis. "How do we possibly thank you enough?" Marcus looked at Thor, then at the Mitchell family, then at the 100+ people gathered around them, many crying, all clearly moved. "You just did," he said simply. "By remembering, by recognizing what Thor did, by helping others understand why this work matters. That's all the thanks we need." Local evening news that night opened with footage that would change everything. Jennifer Kim had returned to the station with her daughter, but the story she'd witnessed wouldn't let her go. By 6 o'clock, she'd convinced her news director that this wasn't just a feel-good piece for the end of the broadcast. This was the lead story. The footage showed Emma's small hand on Thor's head, Danny's tearful embrace of the dog who'd saved him, and Sarah's raw, unfiltered emotion as she recounted the worst day of her life. "Tonight," Jennifer's voice narrated over the images, "we bring you a story about memory, gratitude, and the extraordinary bond between a working police dog and the family whose lives he saved. What started as a routine community festival appearance became something much more powerful when 3-year-old Emma Mitchell recognized the K-9 officer who'd rescued her brother 2 years ago, when she was barely 13 months old." The segment ran for 6 minutes, far longer than typical news stories. It included interviews with Sarah and Michael, footage of Thor and Marcus explaining the search and rescue operation. But what made it truly special was the raw emotion. Nothing was polished or staged. This was genuine human connection, genuine gratitude, genuine love captured in real time. By 9 o'clock that evening, the story had been picked up by the regional news networks. By 11, it was trending on social media. People shared the video with comments like, "I'm not crying, you're crying. And this is why we need to fund K-9 units. And that little girl REMEMBERED. How incredible is that?" Marcus sat in his small apartment that night. Thor sprawled on the floor beside the couch and watched his phone explode with notifications. Friend requests, messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, emails from reporters requesting interviews. His police department's public information officer had already called 3 times, simultaneously thrilled by the positive attention and somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden media interest. But it was a different call that came just before midnight that would prove most significant. Marcus's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, assuming it was another reporter, but something made him pick up. "Officer Riley, this is Catherine Brennan. I'm calling from Sacramento. I hope it's not too late." The woman's voice was professional but warm, with an undercurrent of emotion that Marcus had learned to recognize after the day's events. "It's fine," Marcus said, sitting up straighter. "How can I help you?" "I saw the story about Thor and the Mitchell family," Catherine said. "And I?" Her voice broke slightly. "Officer Riley, 16 years ago, my daughter disappeared from a playground in Sacramento. She was 4 years old. A K-9 unit found her in a drainage culvert 3 miles away where she'd crawled and gotten stuck. The handler's name was Officer James Rodriguez, and his dog was a Belgian Malinois named Ace. They saved my daughter's life." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "That's incredible. Your daughter, she's okay now." "She's 20 years old, studying to be a veterinarian at UC Davis," Catherine said, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. "But here's the thing. I never properly thanked Officer Rodriguez. Life got in the way. We moved to Portland a few years later, and I always meant to reach out but never did. When I saw your story tonight, I was able to find him through the Sacramento Police Department. He's retired now, but he still has Ace. Well, Ace's grandson, actually. The original Ace passed away years ago." "That's wonderful," Marcus said, genuinely moved. "I'm flying to Sacramento this weekend to finally thank him in person," Catherine continued. "But I'm calling because I want to do more. I want to start a foundation that connects families who have been helped by K-9 units with the handlers and dogs who saved them. So many people probably want to say thank you, but don't know how. Your story inspired me to finally do something I should have done 16 years ago." Marcus found himself blinking back tears for what felt like the 100th time that day. "That sounds amazing, Ms. Brennan. Call me Catherine, please. And Officer Riley, would you and Thor be willing to be part of this? To help me spread the word about how important these programs are?" Marcus looked down at Thor, who had lifted his head and was watching his handler with those intelligent amber eyes. "We'd be honored," Marcus said. The next morning, Marcus's captain called him into his office. Captain Sandra Whitmore was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd worked her way up through the ranks and had little patience for drama or publicity stunts. Marcus prepared himself for a lecture about maintaining professional boundaries or not seeking media attention. Instead, Captain Whitmore closed her office door and said, "Riley, in 28 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like what happened yesterday. My phone has been ringing off the hook. The mayor called. The city council president called. Do you know what they want?" Marcus shook his head, uncertain where this was going. "They want to expand the K-9 program," Whitmore said, and for the first time since Marcus had known her, she smiled, really smiled. The budget committee met in an emergency session last night. They're proposing to add 2 more K-9 units immediately and create a dedicated funding stream so the program can never be cut. All because a 3-year-old recognized your dog. Marcus felt lightheaded. Captain, that's incredible. It gets better, Whitmore continued. The Portland Police Foundation has received over $50,000 in donations since last night, all designated specifically for K-9 programs. People are calling from all over the country wanting to contribute. One woman from Texas sent $10,000 with a note saying her son was found by a police dog 20 years ago and she never forgot. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair across from Whitmore's desk. I don't know what to say. Say you'll handle the media attention professionally and that you'll help us use this momentum to do some good, Whitmore said. The department wants to create a K-9 demonstration program for schools, teaching kids about working dogs and safety. We want you and Thor to lead it. Absolutely, Marcus said without hesitation. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah Mitchell sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, Danny doing homework beside her, and Emma playing with blocks on the floor. The video from the festival had been viewed over 2 million times. Sarah's personal Facebook page, which she'd kept private and rarely used, had received hundreds of friend requests and messages from strangers. Most of the messages were supportive, people sharing their own stories of being lost as children, of being found by search and rescue teams, of the fear and relief that came with those experiences. But some messages stood out as particularly significant. One was from a woman named Patricia Gonzalez in Albuquerque. My son has severe autism and elopes frequently. Last year he went missing for 8 hours. A K-9 unit found him in a construction site 2 miles from our home. I've been trying to get our city to invest more in K-9 programs but haven't had much success. Would you be willing to share your story with our local news? Sometimes people need to see the faces, hear the names, understand that these aren't just statistics. These are children who came home because of these incredible dogs. Another came from Derek Thompson in Seattle. I was that kid 30 years ago. I wandered away from a camping trip when I was 6. A search dog named Ranger found me after 2 days in the wilderness. I'm a K-9 officer now because of that experience. Watching your daughter recognize Thor made me remember exactly how I felt when Ranger found me, safe, protected, loved. Thank you for sharing your story. Sarah found herself crying again as she read message after message. She'd spent 2 years trying to move past the trauma of that October day, trying to pack away the fear and horror and focus on gratitude that Danny had been found. But maybe that had been wrong. Maybe the story needed to be told, needed to be shared, needed to remind people why some things, like properly funded search and rescue programs, were worth fighting for. Mom, Danny looked up from his math homework. Are you okay? Sarah wiped her eyes and smiled at her son. Yeah, baby. I'm just reading messages from people who understand what we went through, from other families whose kids were found by police dogs. Danny put down his pencil. There are a lot of us, huh? More than I realized, Sarah said. Then, making a decision, she opened a new browser tab and searched for how to create a nonprofit organization. If Catherine Brennan in Sacramento could start a foundation, if all these families were reaching out wanting to connect and share and support these programs, then maybe Sarah could do something meaningful with this unexpected attention. She created a simple page on a fundraising website. The title was straightforward: Thor's Legacy, Supporting K-9 Search and Rescue Programs. The description told their story simply and honestly, including photos from the festival and a picture of Danny from 2 years ago. The missing poster that had been distributed during the search, showing a scared-looking 5-year-old in a red Spider-Man jacket. Every year, Sarah wrote, hundreds of children go missing in wilderness areas, urban environments, and other dangerous situations. K-9 search and rescue teams are often the difference between life and death. Our family knows this firsthand. These programs save lives, but they're chronically underfunded. Let's change that. Let's make sure every police department has the resources to maintain strong K-9 programs. Let's honor the dogs like Thor who bring our children home. She set a modest initial goal of $10,000, figuring that even if she only raised a few $1,000s, it would be something. She shared the link on her Facebook page with a simple message. If our story touched you, please consider supporting K-9 programs in your community. Then she closed the laptop and went to play blocks with Emma, not expecting much. By the time she checked again 3 hours later, the fundraising page had raised $47,000. 3 weeks after the festival encounter, Sarah Mitchell's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The simple fundraising page she'd created on a whim had exploded beyond all comprehension. The total now stood at $287,000, with donations arriving from all 50 states and 12 countries. Every notification brought a new story: a parent whose child had been found, a former lost child now grown, a K-9 handler grateful for recognition, or simply someone moved by Emma's impossible recognition of Thor. Sarah had converted her dining room into a makeshift office, the table covered with file folders, printouts of nonprofit incorporation documents, and handwritten notes from the dozens of phone calls she fielded daily. Michael had taken a week off work to help manage the overwhelming response, and even then, they felt perpetually behind. What had started as a simple gesture of gratitude had become a full-scale movement. Another email from a police department, Michael called from his laptop in the corner. This one's from Boise. They're asking if we can help them fundraise for 2 new K-9 units. Their budget was cut last year, and they had to retire dogs without replacing them. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. She'd never run a nonprofit before. She'd been a part-time graphic designer, working from home to stay with the kids. Now she was fielding calls from police chiefs, city council members, and major donors, all expecting her to have answers she didn't possess. Emma toddled over and climbed into her mother's lap, sensing her stress. "Mommy's sad?" she asked, her small hand patting Sarah's cheek. "No, baby," Sarah said, hugging her daughter close. "Mommy's just a little overwhelmed, but it's good overwhelming." Danny appeared in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom, my teacher wants to know if Thor can come to our school. She saw the news story and thinks it would be good for our class to learn about police dogs. Can you ask Officer Riley?" Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. "I'll text him, sweetie. He might be pretty busy, though." In truth, Marcus had become a regular presence in their lives over the past 3 weeks. What had started as a follow-up interview for a news segment had evolved into a genuine friendship. Marcus understood better than anyone the strange position Sarah found herself in, thrust into the spotlight, expected to be an expert on K-9 programs despite having no formal background, trying to channel overwhelming public interest into something meaningful. He'd helped her navigate conversations with police departments, explained the technical aspects of K-9 training and funding, and connected her with organizations that could provide guidance. More than that, he'd become a friend to the whole family. Danny worshipped him, following him around during his visits and asking endless questions about police work. Emma still lit up whenever she saw Thor, rushing over to pet him with the fearless affection only a toddler could display. Sarah pulled out her phone and texted Marcus, "Danny's teacher wants Thor to visit his school. Would you be interested? I know you're swamped too." The response came within minutes. "Thor and I would love to. We're doing school visits twice a week now. Department approved it as part of community outreach. What day works?" Sarah shook her head in wonder. Everything was moving so fast. She opened her email to find yet another message that made her breath catch. This one was from the governor's office, requesting a meeting to discuss statewide K-9 program standards and funding. The governor wanted Sarah to be part of the conversation. "Michael," she called out, her voice slightly shaky, "the governor wants to meet with us." Michael looked up from his laptop, his expression shifting from concentration to disbelief. "The actual governor of Oregon." "Apparently, we've become advocates whether we plan to or not," Sarah said, laughing despite herself. It was all so surreal. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a stay-at-home mom whose biggest concern was whether Danny would eat his vegetables and if Emma would sleep through the night. Now she was apparently important enough for the governor's office to request a meeting. Her phone rang, another unknown number, but Sarah had learned to answer them all. "Hello, this is Sarah Mitchell." "Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Robert Chen. I'm an attorney specializing in nonprofit law, and I'd like to offer my services pro bono to help you establish Thor's legacy as a proper 501c3 organization." Sarah felt tears of gratitude spring to her eyes. This had been one of her biggest concerns, the legal complexities of creating a legitimate nonprofit foundation. "Mr. Chen, that would be incredible. We desperately need professional guidance." "I was moved by your story," Robert continued. "My daughter is Emma's age, and when I saw that video of her recognizing Thor, I imagined what your family went through. I want to help. Additionally, my firm has connections with accountants and fundraising consultants who have expressed interest in volunteering their expertise." By the time Sarah hung up 20 minutes later, she had a meeting scheduled for the following week with a team of professionals who wanted to help transform her kitchen table operation into a legitimate, sustainable organization. The relief was overwhelming. That evening, Sarah sat down with Danny after putting Emma to bed. Her son had been quieter than usual lately, and she worried about how all this attention was affecting him. He was, after all, the one at the center of the original story, the lost boy, the one who'd been saved. She found him in his room, looking at a photo album he'd pulled from the bookshelf. "What are you looking at, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, sitting beside him on the bed. Danny turned the album toward her. It was open to October 2023 to the photos from just after the incident. There was Danny in the hospital, wrapped in blankets, looking small and scared. There were photos from the following weeks, Danny clinging to his parents, nightmares interrupting his sleep, the slow process of healing from trauma. "I was thinking about that day," Danny said quietly. "I've been thinking about it a lot since we saw Thor again." Sarah's heart clenched. "Is that good or bad, honey? Is all this attention too much? We can step back from everything if it's bothering you." Danny shook his head. "No, it's good, I think. Before, when I had nightmares, it was just scary. Just me being lost and cold and thinking no one would find me. But now when I think about it, I remember Thor too. I remember that I wasn't alone at the end. Someone came. Someone found me." He looked up at his mother with serious 7-year-old eyes. "Other kids get lost too, right? And maybe if their police departments have good dogs like Thor, those kids will get found too." Sarah pulled her son into a tight embrace, overwhelmed by his emotional maturity. "That's exactly right, Danny. That's exactly what we're trying to do." "Then it's worth it," Danny said firmly. "Even if it's weird having people know our story, even if kids at school ask me about it all the time, it's worth it if it helps other kids." The next week brought the meeting with Robert Chen's team, and Sarah found herself sitting in a downtown conference room that overlooked the Willamette River, surrounded by professionals who were volunteering their time to help her vision become reality. Robert had brought 2 other attorneys from his firm, along with an accountant named Lisa Park and a fundraising consultant named James Morrison, who'd worked with major national charities. "The good news," Robert began, spreading documents across the conference table, "is that your grassroots fundraising has been remarkably successful and, as far as we can tell, completely legitimate. You've been transparent about where funds are going, you've kept decent records, and you haven't made any promises you can't keep. The challenge," Lisa added, "is scaling this up properly. You've raised nearly $300,000 in 3 weeks, which is extraordinary. But to sustain this and turn it into a lasting organization, you need infrastructure. Bank accounts with proper oversight, board members, mission statements, grant writing capabilities, and partnerships with police departments across the country." Sarah felt simultaneously excited and terrified. "I'm just a mom who set up a fundraising page," she said honestly. "I have no idea how to do any of this." "That's why we're here," James said warmly. "Your authenticity is actually your greatest asset. People responded to your story because it was real, unpolished, and deeply human. We don't want to lose that as we professionalize the operation. Your role will be as the face and heart of the foundation, the person who understands why this matters because you lived it. We'll handle the technical details." Over the next 3 hours, they worked through the basics. Thor's Legacy Foundation would have a clear mission: to provide funding, equipment, and training support to K-9 search and rescue programs across the United States, with a particular focus on underfunded departments in rural and underserved areas. They would create grant programs that police departments could apply to, establish partnerships with K-9 training facilities, and work to raise public awareness about the importance of these programs. Sarah would serve as president and chief storyteller. Marcus had already agreed to join the board as K-9 liaison, providing technical expertise and connections within law enforcement. They needed at least 3 more board members, ideally people with backgrounds in nonprofit management, law enforcement, or animal welfare. "I might have someone," Sarah said, remembering the email she'd received. "Catherine Brennan from Sacramento. She reached out after seeing our story. Her daughter was saved by a K-9 unit 16 years ago. She has nonprofit experience and she's been incredibly supportive." "Perfect," Robert said, making a note. "Reach out to her. We need people who understand both the emotional significance and the practical requirements of running an organization like this." By the time Sarah left the meeting, her head was spinning with information. But for the first time since this all began, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could actually do this. They could turn one moment of recognition, one toddler's impossible memory, into something that would protect other children, support other families, and honor the working dogs who serve their communities every single day. That evening, she sat down to write an update for the foundation's donors. She wanted them to know their money was being handled responsibly, that this wasn't just a flash-in-the-pan response to a viral video, but the beginning of something sustainable and meaningful. 3 weeks ago, she typed, "My daughter recognized a dog who saved her brother's life when she was too young to remember, or so we thought. Emma's impossible memory has sparked something beautiful, a community of people who understand how precious our children are and how important the working dogs who protect them truly are. Thank you for being part of Thor's legacy. Together, we're going to make sure that every child who gets lost has the best possible chance of being found and coming home safe." 6 months had passed since that September afternoon at Riverside Park, and Portland was experiencing one of those perfect spring days that reminded people why they loved the Pacific Northwest. The sun hung bright in a cloudless sky. The air carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the trees lining the park, and a gentle breeze kept the temperature comfortable despite the large crowd gathering near the main pavilion. Officer Marcus Riley stood at the edge of the assembled group, his dress uniform crisp and formal, medals pinned to his chest catching the sunlight. Beside him sat Thor, now 8 years old, his muzzle noticeably grayer than it had been half a year ago. The German shepherd's amber eyes were still alert, still intelligent, but there was a softness to him now, the subtle relaxation of a working dog who sensed his service was coming to an honorable end. The crowd was enormous. What had started as a planned retirement ceremony for a single K-9 officer had transformed into something much larger. Over 500 people filled the park, police officers in uniform from departments across Oregon and beyond, families whose children had been found by search and rescue dogs, supporters of Thor's Legacy Foundation, local politicians, news crews, and countless community members who'd been touched by Thor and Emma's story. A temporary stage had been erected, decorated with blue and gold bunting. Photographs of Thor throughout his career were displayed on large boards, Thor as a puppy in training, Thor receiving his badge, Thor working various calls, and prominently featured, the viral photo of 3-year-old Emma with her small hand on Thor's head, the moment that had changed everything. Sarah Mitchell stood backstage with her family, her hands trembling slightly as she reviewed her speech notes for the 100th time. Emma, now nearly 4 years old, wore a special dress for the occasion, blue with white flowers, her wild curls partially tamed with clips. She clutched a small wrapped package that she'd helped prepare, though she didn't fully understand the significance of what was about to happen. Danny, now 8, stood tall in his button-down shirt and tie, looking more grown-up than Sarah was quite ready for. He'd been practicing his own speech for days, determined to get the words exactly right. This was his chance to thank Thor properly, publicly, in a way his 7-year-old self hadn't been able to articulate at the festival. Michael adjusted his tie nervously. "Are you ready?" he asked Sarah, placing a hand on her shoulder. Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't think I'll ever be ready, but it's time." She looked down at Emma. "Remember what we talked about, sweetie. You're going to give Thor his special present." Emma nodded solemnly, hugging the package closer. "For Thor, because he's a good doggy." Mayor Patricia Williams took the stage first, her voice carrying across the crowd through the sound system. "Welcome, everyone, to what has become one of the most meaningful events our city has hosted in recent memory. We're here to honor the retirement of K9 Officer Thor, a dog who has served our community with distinction for 7 years, and whose impact extends far beyond the calls he responded to and the lives he directly saved." The mayor went on to detail Thor's service record: over 300 calls, 12 successful search and rescue operations, countless hours of community engagement, and a flawless record of service without a single complaint or incident. But numbers, she emphasized, couldn't capture the true measure of Thor's impact. 6 months ago, Mayor Williams continued, something extraordinary happened in this very park. A toddler who shouldn't have been able to remember recognized the dog who had saved her brother 2 years earlier. That moment of recognition sparked a movement that has already raised over $800,000 for K9 programs across the country, led to the expansion of our own K9 unit from 3 dogs to 7, and reminded all of us why the bond between humans and working dogs is so special and so important. The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah felt tears already beginning to form in her eyes, and the ceremony had barely started. Captain Sandra Whitmore spoke next, her typically stern demeanor softened by obvious emotion. "In 29 years of law enforcement," she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience, "I've worked with dozens of K9 teams, but I've never seen a partnership quite like Officer Riley and Thor. Their connection goes beyond training, beyond protocol. They trust each other completely, communicate almost telepathically, and together they've accomplished things that neither could have achieved alone." She detailed the Danny Mitchell rescue specifically, explaining the technical difficulties of that search, the terrain, the weather conditions, the time constraints, the vastness of Forest Park's wilderness. "Most search dogs would have given up," Whitmore said. "The scent trail was hours old, contaminated by rain scattered across miles of dense forest. But Thor didn't give up. He never gives up. That's the mark of an exceptional working dog, the refusal to quit until the job is done." Marcus felt his throat tighten as he listened. He'd heard plenty of praise for Thor over the years, but something about this moment, the finality of it, the recognition of a career ending, hit him harder than he'd expected. He reached down and rested his hand on Thor's head, drawing comfort from the familiar warmth of his partner's fur. Then it was Sarah's turn to speak. She walked to the podium on legs that felt unsteady, her family following behind her. The crowd fell silent, hundreds of faces turned toward her expectantly. "I'm not very good at public speaking," Sarah began, her voice wavering slightly. 6 months ago, I was just a mom at a festival with my kids. I had no idea that day would change our lives so completely, but I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful that Emma somehow, impossibly, recognized Thor. I'm grateful that her recognition reminded people why working dogs matter. And I'm grateful that it gave us the opportunity to say thank you, properly, publicly, meaningfully, To the dog who gave us back our son." She paused, collecting herself. Michael stood close beside her, providing silent support. "Danny was 5 years old when he got lost in Forest Park," Sarah continued. "He's 8 now. He's grown so much. He plays basketball, he's learning guitar, he makes straight A's in school, and he drives his little sister crazy the way big brothers are supposed to. He gets to do all those things. He gets to grow up and have a future, because Thor found him, because Officer Riley trusted his partner and didn't give up, because this incredible dog refused to stop searching until Danny was safe." Her voice broke, and she had to pause to wipe her eyes. No one in the crowd moved. Many were crying themselves, caught up in the raw emotion of the moment. "Thor's Legacy Foundation has raised over $800,000 in 6 months, Sarah said, regaining her composure. "That money is going to K-9 programs in 38 states. We've funded the training of 14 new search and rescue dogs. We've provided equipment to underfunded departments. We've created partnerships with training facilities to ensure that handlers have access to the best education possible. And we're just getting started." The crowd applauded, but Sarah raised her hand gently. She wasn't finished. "But this foundation, this movement, this money, none of it is really about us. It's about the next family whose child goes missing. It's about making sure that when a parent experiences the worst moment of their life, when a child is lost and afraid and alone, there will be a Thor somewhere ready to search, ready to track, ready to refuse to give up until that child is found. That's Thor's real legacy. That's what today is really about." She stepped back from the microphone, and Danny came forward. At 8 years old, he still looked small behind the podium, but his voice was clear and strong when he spoke. "My name is Danny Mitchell, and Thor saved my life when I was 5, he began, reading from note cards he'd prepared. "I don't remember everything about that day. I remember being scared and cold. I remember thinking no one would find me. I remember it getting dark and wondering if I'd have to stay in that scary place all night. But then I heard barking, and I heard people calling my name. And then there were lights and voices, and someone was pulling me up out of the ravine where I was stuck." Danny looked up from his cards directly at Thor. "The first thing I saw when they got me out was Thor's face, and I knew I was safe. I held onto him, and I didn't want to let go because as long as I was holding onto him, I knew nothing bad could happen to me. I was only 5, but I understood that this dog had found me. This dog had saved me." Several people in the crowd made audible sounds of emotion. A police officer near the front wiped his eyes beneath his sunglasses. "I'm 8 now," Danny continued. "In 10 years I'll be 18. In 20 years I'll be 28. I'm going to grow up and have a whole life because Thor found me. That's what working dogs do. They give people back their lives. They give families back their children. So thank you, Thor. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for giving me a future." Danny stepped back from the microphone, his own eyes shining with tears, and the crowd rose in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very ground. The applause went on for nearly 2 minutes, waves of it washing over the stage, over Thor, over the family whose story had touched so many hearts. Finally, Mayor Williams returned to the microphone and called Marcus forward. "Officer Riley, it is my honor to officially retire K-9 Officer Thor from active duty with the Portland Police Department, with full recognition of his 7 years of exemplary service." Marcus stepped forward, Thor walking calmly beside him. From a velvet-lined box, the mayor produced Thor's retirement badge, a special commemorative piece that retired working dogs received, marking the end of their service. Marcus knelt beside Thor, his hands trembling slightly as he unclipped the working badge from his partner's collar. The badge Thor had worn for 7 years, through hundreds of calls, dozens of searches, countless hours of service. The small piece of metal felt impossibly heavy in Marcus's palm, weighted with memory and meaning. He'd attached this badge to Thor's collar on the dog's first day of active duty, a young handler filled with pride and nervous energy, partnered with an eager 2-year-old German shepherd who seemed to understand the gravity of the work ahead. Now, 7 years later, Marcus carefully attached the retirement badge in its place. This one was slightly different, still bearing the Portland Police Department insignia, but inscribed with Thor's name, years of service, and a single word that captured everything: hero. "Good boy," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. "You're done now. You're officially retired. No more calls, no more searches, just rest and play and being a regular dog." Thor's tail wagged slowly, and for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn his partner understood exactly what was happening. Those amber eyes held intelligence that went beyond canine comprehension. They held partnership, trust, and 7 years of shared experiences that had forged an unbreakable bond. The crowd applauded again, but this time the sound was softer, more reverent, as if everyone present recognized they were witnessing something sacred, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Mayor Williams gestured for Emma to come forward. The nearly 4-year-old approached the podium with the wrapped package clutched to her chest, her steps careful and deliberate. Sarah walked beside her daughter, one hand gently guiding her toward Thor. "Emma has something special for Thor," Sarah explained to the crowd, her voice amplified by the microphone. She picked it out herself and helped wrap it. "Emma, do you want to tell everyone what you got for Thor?" Emma nodded, her curls bouncing. In her small, clear voice that had started all of this 6 months ago, she said, "I got Thor a special collar, because he's not a working doggy anymore. He's a home doggy now, and home doggies get special collars." The simplicity and sweetness of the statement brought fresh tears to many eyes. Emma knelt down beside Thor, and with Sarah's help, began unwrapping the package. Inside was a beautiful leather collar, not the utilitarian working collar Thor had worn for years, but something softer, more comfortable, dyed a rich brown and studded with small brass rivets. Attached to it was a tag that caught the sunlight as Sarah held it up for the crowd to see. The tag was engraved with Thor's name on one side. On the other side, in elegant script, it read, "Hero saved Danny Mitchell. October 15, 2023, changed a community, September 2024. "Can I put it on him?" Emma asked Marcus, her small face serious with the responsibility. Marcus unclipped Thor's working collar, the one he'd worn for 7 years, and handed it to Captain Whitmore, who would preserve it as part of the department's K-9 program history. Then he nodded to Emma. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Thor would be honored." With small, careful fingers, Emma fastened the new collar around Thor's neck. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, as patient with the toddler as he'd been 6 months ago when she'd first approached him. When the collar was secure, Emma threw her small arms around Thor's neck in an embrace that embodied pure, innocent love. "Thank you for finding Danny," she whispered into Thor's fur, loud enough for the nearby microphones to catch. "You're the best doggy in the whole world." The crowd erupted again, this time with cheers mixed with applause. Cameras flashed continuously. News crews captured every angle of the moment. But for those directly involved, Marcus, Thor, the Mitchell family, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. This moment was just for them, a private exchange of gratitude and love happening in front of 500 witnesses. Captain Whitmore stepped forward with another announcement. "As part of Thor's retirement, we have some additional news to share. Thanks to the incredible fundraising efforts of Thor's Legacy Foundation and the generosity of this community, the Portland Police Department K-9 program has expanded significantly. I'd like to introduce you to some of Thor's colleagues and successors." 6 K-9 handlers walked onto the stage, each with their partner. There was Luna, the young Belgian Malinois who would be taking over Thor's primary search and rescue duties, a sleek, energetic 2-year-old with alert dark eyes. Beside her was Ranger, a chocolate Labrador retriever trained in cadaver detection. Then came Zeus, another German shepherd specializing in apprehension and patrol work. Following them were 3 newer additions to the program: Maya, a border collie trained in wilderness search; Axel, a bloodhound whose tracking abilities were already legendary; And finally, Scout, a golden retriever being trained in trauma response and victim comfort. 6 months ago, we had 3 K9 units, Captain Whitmore announced. Thanks to Thor and the Mitchell family story, we now have 7, with plans to add 2 more within the year. We have better equipment, better training facilities, and a dedicated funding stream that ensures our K9 program will never face budget cuts again. That is Thor's legacy. That is what one dog's dedication and one family's gratitude has accomplished. The handlers formed a line with their dogs, and in a moment that had clearly been choreographed, each dog sat at attention while their handlers saluted Thor. It was a gesture of respect from working dogs to a retiring veteran, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus felt his composure finally crack completely. Tears streamed down his face as he watched the current K9 team honor his retiring partner. Then came the final surprise of the ceremony. David Torres, the Community Association president who'd been present at the original festival encounter, walked to the microphone carrying a large framed photograph. "This," he said, holding up the frame so the crowd could see, "is the photograph that started everything." Emma Mitchell touching Thor for the first time, recognition and love on her face, Thor accepting her touch with grace and gentleness. This image has been seen by millions of people around the world. It's been shared, reposted, printed in newspapers and magazines. It's become a symbol of the bond between working dogs and the people they serve. He turned the frame around to reveal that beneath the photograph was a plaque. This original print, personally signed by Jennifer Kim, the journalist who first shared this story, is being donated to the Portland Police Department K9 training facility, where it will hang in the main hall. Every handler who trains there, every dog who prepares for service, will pass by this image. They'll see what their work means. They'll understand that somewhere, a family is whole because a dog refused to give up. That is the standard Thor has set. That is the legacy every working dog aspires to. The photograph was presented to Captain Whitmore, who accepted it with visible emotion. She promised it would be given a place of honor in the new training facility that was currently under construction, another benefit of the Foundation's fundraising efforts. As the formal ceremony concluded, the crowd was invited to stay for a reception. Tables laden with food had been set up, and people mingled, sharing stories and celebrating Thor's career. But the most meaningful moments happened around Thor himself. Families whose children had been found by K9 units lined up to meet him, to pet him, to thank him as a representative of all search and rescue dogs. An elderly woman whose husband had been located by a police dog after wandering from a memory care facility knelt down with difficulty and placed her hand on Thor's head, whispering her gratitude through tears. A teenage boy who'd been found by a K9 unit when he'd run away from home at age 12 brought his own dog, a rescue he'd adopted specifically because of that experience, to meet Thor. Danny stayed close to Thor throughout the reception, his hand resting on the dog's back, as if maintaining physical contact would preserve the connection between them. Emma tired after an hour and fell asleep in her father's arms, exhausted by the emotion and excitement of the day. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus finally loaded Thor into his personal vehicle, not the K9 unit vehicle he'd driven for 7 years, but his own SUV. Thor would be going home with him permanently now, to the house Marcus had prepared with a comfortable dog bed, a fenced yard, and no expectations beyond companionship. Sarah and her family walked Marcus to his car, wanting these final moments before Thor's new life truly began. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Marcus had talked about his plans during their many conversations over the past months. "Luna is my new partner," Marcus said, nodding toward the young Belgian Malinois who was playing with her handler across the parking lot. "We start official patrols together next week. She's talented, eager, smart as they come. She'll be an excellent working dog." He paused, looking down at Thor settled in the back seat. "But she's not Thor. There will never be another Thor. No, Sarah agreed softly. There won't be, but that's okay. Thor doesn't need to be replaced, he needs to be honored, and today he was. Today everyone understood exactly what he means, what all working dogs mean. Marcus extended his hand to shake Sarah's, but she ignored it and hugged him instead. Thank you, she said, for everything, for finding Danny, for being part of this foundation, for trusting me when I had no idea what I was doing. Thank you, Marcus replied, for remembering, for making sure the world remembered, for turning one moment of recognition into something that will protect children for years to come. Danny approached for his own goodbye, wrapping his arms around Thor one final time. I'll come visit you, he promised the dog. Officer Riley said I could. We'll play in your yard and I'll bring you treats and tell you about school. Okay. Thor's tail wagged, and Danny took that as agreement. As Marcus drove away, Thor's silver-gray muzzle resting on his paws in the back seat, the new retirement collar gleaming around his neck, Sarah stood with her family and watched until the vehicle disappeared from view. Is Thor happy now? Emma asked sleepily from her father's arms. Yes, baby, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face one final time. Thor is happy. He's earned his rest. He's earned his peace. And because of him, because of what he did and what his story inspired, dozens of other dogs are out there right now, ready to search, ready to find, ready to bring children home to their families. She looked up at the darkening sky, at the first stars beginning to appear, and felt a profound sense of completion. 6 months ago, her 3-year-old daughter had recognized a dog who shouldn't have been remembered. That impossible recognition had sparked a movement that raised nearly $1 million, expanded K-9 programs across the country, and reminded thousands of people why the bond between working dogs and the communities they serve is sacred. Thor's active service had ended, but his legacy, the foundation bearing his name, the programs his story had inspired, the children who would be found by dogs trained with resources his story had provided, would continue for years, maybe generations. Emma had been right, in the simple way toddlers often are. Thor was the doggy who saved Danny, but he'd also saved something larger. He'd saved faith in the power of working dogs, in the importance of properly funded search and rescue programs, and in the profound truth that sometimes the smallest voice saying the simplest thing can change the world. As the Mitchell family walked back to their car, hand in hand, Danny looked back one more time toward where Thor had disappeared. Good doggy, he whispered into the evening air, forever. The end.